Example of a volunteer. I'd like everyone to think of an example of a volunteer in a leadership or a high responsibility role. It could be at your organization or it could be just in general. Just take a moment to think about that. If you want to get wild and crazy and put your example in the chat box, you can. I'm sure that we can all think of, oh, I see some examples coming in, but I'm sure we can all think of examples of volunteers in high responsibility roles, in leadership roles. Maybe they're a president of an association, maybe they're a treasurer and they oversee a large foundation budget. Maybe they're out there saving lives or risking their own as an EMT or a firefighter. Maybe they're speaking to large groups on your on behalf of your organization. Maybe they're training and organizing other volunteers. And when we think of those examples, it's easy to see how volunteers are doing big things and how they are increasing how they can really increase our capacity. I know in the type of work that we all do, we can always be doing more. And so today we're going to talk to our panelists about how we can identify and develop these kinds of volunteers and how we can create space for them in our organization. We'll start out by introducing the organizations that are here today, and then our panelists, and then we'll jump into some questions. So Mark has already introduced PDCHR. I'll give a little background on SVA-VA. We are the Southeastern Virginia Association for Volunteer Administrators. So if you are a leader of volunteers, if you work with volunteers and organize them, this group is for you. We are a membership organization, just $30 a year. We meet every other month for professional development and networking. It's really a great organization. So this is our monthly meeting, kind of teamed up with Mark and PDCHR, as well as Volunteer Hampton Roads. Olga is one of our panelists, but she's also our representative from Volunteer Hampton Roads. Olga, could you give a little explanation of what Volunteer Hampton Roads is?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. Volunteer Hampton Roads is a volunteer center. So what we do well is connect volunteers from the community with opportunities in nonprofits. And that ranges from yard work to help me with my, I need help with my QuickBooks to board service. So that's what we do.
Okay, great. And in just a sec, we'll transition to introducing our panelists, but I wanted to say that Mark will be sharing out the contact info for these three organizations as well as our panelists, so you'll have that available to you. So on our panel today, we have 5 wonderful individuals from our community. I'm going to give them a chance to each introduce themselves. And Olga, since you already started talking, why don't we'll start out with you.
All right. So I am the VP for Nonprofit Services. So I talk to many of you, recognize many of the faces, but I am here today as a former volunteer first responder. So I will share my experience as a member of an all volunteer fire department and rescue squad. In New York, sorry, but it is, that works the same everywhere.
Great. Next, Joy Parker, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Joy Parker. I'm the Director of Volunteer Services at Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters. And I've been in this role for 21 years and in volunteer management for probably 26, 27. So I'm just going to talk about my experience with volunteers and high potential volunteers in the healthcare setting.
Excellent. Next, we have Annalise Adams.
Good morning or afternoon, I guess. My name is Annalise Adams, and I'm the Statewide Engagement Officer for the Virginia Service Commission. So we're an organization that is seated in local government, or state government, to really help support organizations across the state and using volunteerism to get the greatest impact. So today I'm here to talk about kind of volunteerism from a statewide perspective, but most specifically how organizations can use programs like AmeriCorps to really help engage and sustain high potential volunteers.
Excellent. Thanks, Annalise. Next, we have Tammy Mullins Rice, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yes, I'm Tammy Mullins Rice. I'm the volunteer coordinator for Centera Hospice. But today I'm here to talk about volunteering in all volunteer organizations. I belong to two, and I have 25 plus years working in volunteer engagement.
Thanks, Tammy. We also have, last but not least, Kathy Harper.
Hi. Am I on? I guess so.
Yep, go for it.
I'm Kathy Harper. I'm the VP of Volunteers for PMI Hampton Roads, and PMI is a project management institute. And I'm here to talk about how we recruit our volunteers, onboard them, and also how we set up our positions to how we identify high-profile volunteers.
Excellent. I got everybody, didn't I? Speak up now. Okay, good. So our panelists come from a wide cross section of organizations and types of work, lots of experience there, as well as in our audience. So hopefully you're starting to think about how these experiences might connect with you and what you do. So I want to jump into the first question. This question has to do with kind of assessing the organizational needs and volunteer skills. So my question is to the panel, how do you identify high potential volunteers? What does that look like to you?
Darcy, I'll start if you want. Sure. For me, I think it starts as soon as I meet the person. It's really part of the interview process. I try not to go into an interview with a set script of questions that I ask the same people. Of course, I've got certain things I want to know during the course of the interview, but I also want to kind of keep my mind open and pick up on what they're talking about, their interests, their professional background, maybe a past connection that they have with the hospital, and explore that a little bit more. I think, like most things that we do that involves volunteers, it's all relationships, and trying to connect with them and really flush out, what's your true passion? Because you could come in and say, hey, I want to volunteer in the gift shop, and that's great. But if you have a particular experience with our hospital from years ago, and then we have a campaign or a new program that comes up or I know of that is going to tap into that, then I want to be able to talk about it or make a note about it and come back to the person, later to see if they have an interest in something a little more personal to them.
Thanks. Do our other panelists have anything they want to add in that vein?
Sure, I'll go.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in regards to my American Association of University Women is a membership organization, but we are across the state and we have to always recruit for the state board. And so as a district rep, I have Southeast District. I work with all the branches in that district. So I'm identifying people, I'm talking to them, watching them, trying to understand where they want to go in the organization, so that when we are are looking to nominate people into VP of membership or finance, we have a list of names that we can go to start talking to them. But we've already been grooming and mentoring them in the meantime while we're getting ready to ask.
Yeah, and kind of building on that. So we really encourage folks to kind of think about the segments of the population that are going to be really good fits for what you actually need. So a lot of it is kind of the pre-work that goes in before you even meet somebody. We really encourage folks to think about, you know, what are actually the most important elements or qualities of a volunteer that to serve in your program, because oftentimes we can kind of think about the skills. So we can think about, I need a volunteer who can lift 40 pounds and who can, you know, is willing to be flexible and adaptable. But are there, you know, whether it's is there a specific attitude that you really need your volunteers to be okay with? Like, is your organization really fast paced and you need someone who's flexible and patient? If you're working with kids, kind of thinking about, are there certain qualities of a volunteer kind of beyond the traditional position description that you want to sort of feel out in your potential applicants? And then also thinking about kind of doing that extra legwork. So just like Tammy was saying, when you have a focus, it's a little bit easier to find those people because you have an idea of specifically who you're looking for. And so we really encourage folks to think about, you know, retired volunteers or college volunteers or whatever it is. You may be going after multiple groups, but folks are going to feel more identified and maybe connect more with the opportunity if you're marketing to them specifically, as opposed to just casting a wide net, specifically with high potential volunteers. So if you're asking for something that is a little bit more intensive than just a one and done volunteer project, kind of going that extra mile in the recruitment can make a big difference in who ends up applying.
I think also then jumping on what Annalise is saying, you need to have very clear what it is that you want these volunteers to do. So, you know, for the fire department, you know, we need firefighters, but not everybody is willing to mask up and go into the fire, right? But there are people who need to operate the pumps. There are people who need to bring us coffee and snacks after, you know, or during a big fire. So I think it is very important, as Annalise says, you know, identify what is the kind of volunteer that you need, but have in mind what it is, where do you want them to plug them in, right? You want to, yes, you need people to go inside. You need people to operate the pumps, and then you need EMTs, but you also need drivers. Some of the drivers, that's all they do, right? So you identify all the skills. And I think that also you make as much room as possible, but you have to have those things that you identify. So, which means for volunteer administrators that we need to be plugged into what are the needs of the organization, right? And encourage our team of our colleagues to think outside the lines, right? And especially in skilled volunteering, like I mentioned, like you hear your boss is like struggling with QuickBooks, you know, maybe they need someone that will come and help them out with that. But anyway, so I'll shut up. You just, you know, have your needs in mind.
Well, at PMI, we have, as you can imagine, a project management association. We have some structure to it. And so what I found is that what you do is you bring people in at a lower level. So we have presidents and vice presidents and then directors. And if you bring somebody in at a lower level and then they get a feel for the organization, what the mission is, what they like to do, what they may not like to do. And then you also look at how do they respond. So for example, if you need somebody to do something, you want to see if they'll respond in like 24 hours or 48 hours, or if you have to ask them to please call you about it, depending on what it is. And you get a feel for their level of commitment and organization. So for example, when I started in the Atlanta chapter as the best example, and I ordered the pizza for one of the significant other groups. And so I guess I did a pretty good job at that because they said, would you like to be the director of education? So I moved up to there. And apparently they liked that. And then I moved up to VP of membership. But because of apparently the way I interacted on that way, they thought, well, we know Kathy's going to show up. We know she's going to respond reasonably quickly. And if she can't, she'll tell us. that she can because something's come up. So she's a dependable person. So I think that's one. The other thing that I think is interesting about PMI is when you become interested in the president's job, it's a 3-year commitment. The first year, you are the president-elect and you get to follow the other 2 around to see what's going on and you pick up tasks. The second year, you're the president, and then you are the chief operating officer and make the decision. And then the third year, you're the past president. And again, you can step in for the president or whatever, because you've had that experience. I just think that's a great way to have a volunteer organization.
Thanks, Kathy. And I think we'll touch back on that sort of training leadership pipeline a little bit later. I think you guys have touched on some really good points. You know, volunteer administration is complex. It really requires a lot of relationship management and getting to know the volunteer, but getting to know your organization as well. I do have one follow-up question, but before I jump into that, I wanted to invite our audience. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Mark's going to be monitoring the chat, and we'll kind of feed in those questions as we can. But so here's my follow-up. Several of you mentioned that before the interview, doing that pre-work of really understanding your organization's needs so that you can connect volunteers. And I was wondering if any of you had some examples of how you do that, how you collect that information, how you you work with your colleagues or fellow members to hone in on those what those needs are.
Well, we at PMI, we have an annual planning session, which says, here's what the objectives are, and here's what we did last year, and here's what we're going to do. And it consists of the VPs and the 3 presidents.
I know this part can feel like a lot of extra paperwork, and Olga's gonna laugh when she hears this, but I'm a big fan of position descriptions. So I know it can be tempting to just kind of bring volunteers on and have people start stepping into roles. But I'm just a really big fan of kind of writing down from the beginning, sort of what your expectations are, where you foresee the volunteer fitting in, what you're committing to do as a part of that relationship. Because I think that even whether it's something that you use to recruit your volunteer or not, just having that and being able to share that with staff is just a really critical part of a high potential volunteer being utilized or leveraged to the maximum impact. And then also just thinking about asking your current volunteers, right? So if you have folks that are kind of in that high potential volunteer role at the moment, kind of asking them, what did you find out in the first, 6 months that you volunteered with us? Are there things that we could do a better job of kind of integrating into our outreach, and thinking about, you already kind of hopefully know the kind of people that you're hoping to engage. And so getting their feedback can be a really, really helpful element, because they'll see things that you might not see as a person that kind of is in the work day in, day out. And so really, continuing to excel and work with your existing high potential volunteers to help recruit more high potential volunteers can be really helpful.
I agree with Annalise, and along with the position descriptions, because I'm big on that as well. It's very important to know what exactly I'm being recruited to do, or who I'm recruiting. I think also along with that is term limits. Term limits are very important to me as a volunteer. So telling other volunteers, okay, this position, as Kathy said, the president was a 3-year commitment. Letting people know up front what the commitment is very important, because they know what else is going on in their lives and whether or not they could commit to this actual job at this actual moment. And somebody might say, I really want to do this. I'm very interested, but I need to wait a year, that sort of thing.
Tammy, you're speaking my language. Yeah, I totally agree. Folks are, and I mean, just going on a tangent, but folks are way more likely to agree to something if they know what they're agreeing to. These are the people we can call, and they definitely can be. But I think being able to point to a list and say, this is what we're asking, makes folks feel a lot more confident to say, yes, I can do that, or no, I can't do that, or I have an idea of somebody else who could do that, really well.
I have to jump in on this because it's something that we always at Volunteer Hampton Roads, we talk about it. And many of you maybe have heard me say this, even if what the project that you need is to rebuild your website, that still can feel like a black hole to a volunteer. Like, whoa, how long is that going to take? And when am I getting out of this? You can still chunk it down, and have engage someone that will, create positions or create projects. We like to talk about projects with specific deliverables, and so the first thing that you do is you need to have an audit of your website. And that is something that is easier to wrap your head around as a volunteer. You have some deliverables, and then you go from there, right? So I think that is crucial. Thank you, Tammy and Annalise.
I want to visit the chat for a moment. There's some positive feedback about the idea of asking current volunteers about needs and recruiting other high potential volunteers. And then Kylie Elliott Sydney said that she has an online interactive brief that staff can request volunteer support for online virtual tasks in the hospital or at events. I run lunch and learns with staff every few months and remind them of how volunteers can support them to encourage staff to think outside the box. And I think that's the flip side to, the volunteer not knowing what to expect. Sometimes the volunteer manager or your colleague, fellow staff member, they can see using volunteers as overwhelming too. It seems like more work sure they have things on their plate that they'd like to get to, and maybe a volunteer could help, but that would, it feels like a big push to prepare that for a volunteer, to train the volunteer. So that's great. Kylie, did you have anything to add besides what I read?
Hi, I'm coming from you at 4:30 in the morning from Sydney. I think this is a really important point. It's taken me a long time to get to that point, because at the Sydney Children's Hospital, where I'm at, it's not just one hospital, it's 2 hospitals and a hospice, plus our transport and our kids research. So they all were standalone 3 years ago and became a network. So it's for all kids in Sydney. So they never had a volunteer coordinator. Everyone just had a couple of Excel sheets where they asked their friends to come along and help. So it's taken a while to get staff to understand that the volunteer that I'm bringing you, that I've interviewed and done all those checks on, are a different sort of volunteer than someone who might be just rattling a tin at an event. And their minds are blown now. So I've got an online portal, which is just like, I call it an online portal, but it's just SharePoint with the word volunteer on it. But all of a sudden everyone thinks it's fancy. And they will put a task in there, and I say, I'm just your HR, so I'll get you the best person to do that job, but you need to give me the task. You need to give me clear instructions, because sometimes I'll be doing this at 2 o'clock in the morning or on the weekend when it suits them. And so we've had our marketing team, because they just said, well, what if the volunteers looked at different children's charities around the world and what they're doing in marketing? And it sparked something in our marketing manager, who's now having meetings with the UK, the big hospital in the UK, the Great Ormond Street. And they're doing amazing things because of a volunteer. And so I turned around and said, we work in a hospital setting. A lot of these volunteers are college students. They're going to be your clinicians in 10 years' time. In 10 years' time, it's not just Kylie from a volunteer program. You're going to be ringing me and saying, that volunteer, she's now running neurology. Can you introduce me? And now people are getting really excited, and we've got this really big portal. So now volunteers actually have choice. They can sit there and choose, do I want to do a bit of research? Do I want to ring a phone, use a phone and ring a donor to say thank you for your $10 donation? So it takes a bit. And, at first there was a couple of people that turn up, but now all the staff are actually just throwing things in, and it can be just, you've just got to get your staff on board and just explain to them that there is different levels to volunteers and not all just rattling tins. So I just think that's really important. That's something that was really hard for me to learn. So if I can make it easier for you guys, that'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you. I think our panelists would agree, and that's a good point. It doesn't happen overnight, building these relationships and getting the buy-in. So be patient with yourselves if this is something that you're working on. Anything? Go ahead.
Sorry, Darcy, I just wanted to add that one of the things that also fosters this kind of thinking in an organization is that you share the successes, right? Look, like what Kylie is saying, like all the things that are happening thanks to the volunteers that you share with them so that they see that this is worthwhile.
Excellent point.
We have at PMI, we have a volunteer appreciation meeting. And at that meeting, all the volunteers get some kind of memento. We did cups. Ooh, I should have brought one. I can pick it up. But we did cups, and you get a certificate. And it's a nice way to say thank you to everybody. That might be an idea.
Also just wanted to kind of hop in. When Kylie was talking about working with the different staff, it was making me think back to my days working at a nonprofit where I was that staff person who was saying, I can't use volunteers, like there's no way. And so I'm just also thinking about kind of how to integrate reluctant staff into those recognition efforts to be able to say, look what volunteers are doing other places. And I think that by engaging them to see the impact of using volunteers well, then that can also help inspire some folks that may be a little bit more slow to adopt.
I would absolutely agree with that. I know one year, we did it a couple of years, but of course, during volunteer week, we always try to do recognition things, but I think it's important also throughout the year to take those opportunities to get in front of your upper management or whoever your influential groups are and make sure that even if you're giving a short report, that you are tooting your own horn about what your volunteers are accomplishing, what programs they are assisting. But probably one of the most amazing things that we did in years past is along the lines of what Annalise was saying, is during volunteer week, we took all of our volunteer names. And at the time we had, probably 450 to 500 adult volunteers, but we divided them up into lists of maybe 10 with their phone numbers. And then we contacted department managers all throughout the health system and gave them their list. And they were to call those volunteers and thank them for their service. And I gave them, along with their name and their phone number, where they volunteered, maybe how long they'd been volunteering. I had more feedback from people, from managers who just were blown away. Like at first they were a little reluctant, but then it was, oh my gosh, I had no idea this person has volunteered for 10 years and I had a great conversation, or this volunteer cried when I called them. And it was just so overwhelming to be recognized, So something like that, I think, just getting your program successes out and trying to actually connect high-level managers or managers in general throughout your organization with what you're actually doing is so important.
Yeah, this year I actually asked staff and managers to send me a note to put in our newsletter about how important volunteers are to them. But Kathy, when you talked about your gifts, I went and grabbed, I got like a soup mug, and here's my little notebook and my ink pen with the hand sanitizer and a mug. So always trying to give them a gift to let them know how much I appreciate them. But the phone calls and the notes, I think, as Joy was saying, that portion of support is so amazing that volunteers just love that.
We also have a newsletter. PMI has a newsletter. It's on our website, and we have a spot on the newsletter for the Volunteer of the Month. And I think that makes you feel good that somebody actually is recognizing, who you are and what you did, and that you spent all this time on it. So that's another idea. I
really like what's coming out of this discussion about, like, we're a volunteer administrators. You're not just relationship managers, but you're relationship facilitators. So you're kind of enabling these relationships to build between your volunteers and your staff, and your volunteers and each other, because that just builds community and it helps the connections appear. But we have a question in the chat. Erica asks, I work for a small organization that really only uses volunteers for our biggest event. Do you have any suggestions for maintaining relationships with volunteers for the rest of the year?
I'll go first on that one. Since I started as the volunteer coordinator for hospice as the pandemic started, I had volunteers on our list, but I couldn't actually use them, and none of them had met me. So this was a challenge, and that was one of the reasons the newsletter got started, was because I needed to have a way to contact them several times a year. I am a big note writer, so I started Volunteer Appreciation Week. When I first started, I didn't have all this stuff, so I wrote thank you cards to every single one that were handwritten. And then after that, I realized I had all of their birthdays. So I started sending birthday cards each month. It was just those little touches. And now if there was a holiday, I would send an email, blind copied. I mean, they didn't see each other's emails, with whatever that holiday was, Happy Thanksgiving or Happy New Year or whatever. Just the engagement. And what has happened in the 2 years is they look forward to that. And I've actually been told that they were very excited about having me on board as their coordinator.
That's it. I'm moving. Tammy, where are you? I need a birthday card. I was just going to jump in and say a lot of our high potential volunteers are coming to the opportunity, not just to serve, but also because they're looking for experience. So they're looking to get hours for a certification or a credential or something like that. And so what I would do is I don't know what kind of area your organization works in, but kind of thinking about, are there ways to invite them to trainings or invite them on an event planning committee, or just engaging them, even if it's not maybe traditional volunteer service activities, thinking about helping them kind of stay in touch with your organization is a really great way to kind of help folks feel more involved. So then when the event rolls around, they're ready to kind of step up their engagement and maybe take a larger role or something like that. We've really seen that providing professional development for volunteers is a huge way to kind of help volunteers really feel like they're getting something out of the experience, and then they are more likely to engage deeper with our events in the future.
Also, I would like to say, skill volunteering, that is where skill-based volunteering, that's where things when you might get some more involvement, right? And again, this is you're going around your staff and finding out if there are needs that possibly could be filled by the skills that a volunteer can bring in. I also want to say this, not every organization can do it, but I think that you can ask your volunteers what they would like to bring to your organization. Volunteers are privy to things that happen in your organization, but with fresh eyes, right? So I'm someone who thinks in terms of systems and efficiency and lack thereof. And I was volunteering right before the pandemic at an organization that works with refugees, and both my son and I, he and I think the same way. We went in there and we were like, let us at it. We can get this organized. And, they're doing a lot of good, but there's a lot of inefficiencies. And one of the things is I donate to them every month, and they had no way of knowing that I am the same person that came to volunteer, because the volunteer recruitment, the list of volunteers and the list of donors don't communicate, for example. So for me, that was a no-brainer. It's like, hey, just put it in Excel and upload it, and now you know that the same, you can gauge affinity. So, but that was, nobody asked me, that is something that I thought on my own because that's how I think. And I think that your volunteers that are truly engaged with you may have ideas as to how to help. And remember that, your organization needs board members. Maybe what you need is to introduce them to your, to your CEO, to your ED. If you can gauge, after with Tammy, you've engaged with them and you know them, so well, you may know that this might be someone that might be interested in serving in your board.
Also, I think she said that they participate in events, right? So if you have volunteers that participate in a day of event, I'm just saying event planning. When I worked for Coleman, the minute the race was over, we started the next day on the next race. So if you have people who participate day of, they may potentially be people that you can use for the year of planning. You put them on a committee. If they liked what they did during your event day, then that might be an area. And then, as Olga said, they'll point out some things that didn't work so well and how you could do it differently. And now they're engaged. They've got buy-in. And so as long as you're doing that event, you got them.
Great, thanks for that question, Erica. So see, guys, put your questions out there. There's lots of good information amongst all the brains on this meeting. I will say that Annalise in the chat box dropped a related webinar, or what did you call it? A masterclass.
Yeah, so the annual conference that the Virginia Service Commission usually puts on has been transformed this year. So we're calling it the Virginia Volunteerism Summit. And while Olga was talking about kind of the division between volunteers and donors, we actually have a masterclass that we'll be presenting on day 2 of the summit that's going to specifically focus on how to break down those silos. And so just a little plug for anybody that might be interested in joining. Lauren's already signed up to be there. So if you want to hang out with me and Lauren, you should come.
Excellent.
Hey, Darcy.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in for a second?
Please.
Just a couple observations. I know I'm not on the panel, but I'm crashing the party anyways because it's my party. To the last thing that Annalise just put in the chat box, on Friday, everybody who showed up today is going to get an email thanking you for being a participant, as well as a list of resources. So unless Annalise says no, I'm going to add that masterclass to the resource list. So you'll have that, handy if you haven't already opened up the page. Secondly, going back to the, to this question about, working with volunteers who are only there, like once in a while. From my vantage point, running PDCHR, focusing on membership associations, that's a very broad question, not just for the active volunteers, but also really for membership whatsoever. How do you keep them engaged, throughout? So without going, without even going 2 pounds into that, I love some of the stuff that Tammy and Annalise and Kylie, brought up either in the chat or here about doing things for the volunteers that are not necessarily a request to do something for your organization. That's just like, super. It's like, holy moly, Kylie reached out to me, Mark reached out to me, Darcy reached out to me, and it wasn't with a task. Oh my goodness, great feelings, low cost, incredible return on investment. So I just kind of wanted to underscore that, particularly for those of you from membership associations. It's like, this is applicable for all of your members. Not every conversation has to be a please show up, please give. It's just like, here, we love you, take this. So.
Yeah, and just to tag on to that, the conversations can be celebrating the successes. That's a great thing to communicate, and it kind of fits in. I remember when I was teaching middle school, every once in a while I would call a parent with something good that happened. I mean, it blew them away, but it also paved the way for us to have a better relationship later on, when maybe an issue did come up. And I think it's the same, it's just another example of a relationship. So other questions from the audience, feel free to put them in the chat. I have a next question I would like to pose to the group, thinking about how do you get, every once in a while, a a high potential volunteer will just, fall out of the sky into your lap. But usually it takes some development, the pre-work that we've discussed, but also once you've identified that volunteer and have them engaged, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about how we develop a volunteer into that high role, whether it's training or evaluation. To put it in a shorter term, how do you know they're ready and how do they know they're ready? That kind of thing.
I want to go first because it's easy for something that is like fire department or EMT, right? So one of the things that is important is to know who's ready and who isn't, right? So you do the training and you pay the volunteer fire department will pay the training for the firefighter and will pay the training for the EMT and provide the materials and all the things. But there are requirements, right, from both sides. So the fire department will pay that, but the volunteer is committing also to going to the trainings, to studying, to gaining all the certifications so that then you can serve as whatever it is, as an EMT, as a firefighter. And I think that it is important even for when you're not even talking about high potential or skill, but that we know who's in and who's not, who's a volunteer that is in the inner circle and who isn't. And there is a badge of honor, right? For the fire department, we wear our badges and we have our t-shirts and all the things. But for example, I remember when my helmet, for firefighter, got the sticker for EMT and how that was recognition and it was satisfying. And I think that we've sometimes need to go back to remembering what makes someone volunteer. And a lot of it has to do with, yes, I want to do good for the community. Of course, I want to serve my community, but that means that I need to be aware of what is that good. And I need to know the impact. And so I also want to have a certification, maybe. I also want to have a cute mug, right? Like Tammy and a t-shirt, whatever. But thinking about going back to why is it that people volunteer? And yes, the training. So, it's more clear cut in the emergency system, but the rules or the principles still apply.
I would say from a membership organization point of view, where it's all volunteer, where everyone's a volunteer, we're all volunteers. One of the concerns that I had in the beginning, I've been a member of American Association of University Women for over 20 years. And one of the things that usually happens is you join, you're a new member, you're younger than the other members, and all of a sudden they're on you for everything, but you still don't know where in this organization you have your niche. So for me, I always feel like new members should have an opportunity to breathe, find out what the organization is about, and then what areas they want to be in. Now, but along those lines, Darcy, where you said, how do you know if they're ready or they know they're ready? I'll give a perfect example. In my branch in Virginia Beach, our national organization has a focus on diversity, inclusion, and equity and inclusion. So one of the new things we had to have was a representative in each branch. Well, we didn't have one. We were just, we filled it with the president. That's what we always do. If you don't have a person, the president does it. But we had a member who joined our branch, and she may have been a member for about not quite a year, but we were talking about the diversity, equity, inclusion the whole time she was there. And she finally said, like, I do that with my work at ODU. I would really love to do that for the branch. And she asked, what all is it involved? I said, well, actually, it's not an officer position, it's an appointed position. So you can do it as long as you want to. So it's not like you have a set standard of how long you have to do it. And her question was, sometimes she has to work evenings and she can't make meetings. I said, we will make it work for however it wants to. I said, this is brand new. However you develop it, we will accept and love it. And she's been amazing at it. I sent a lot of her emails out. But the point is, she told us, she came to us, this is my niche, this is where I want. I would have never approached her as a new member. And I have to fight really hard with my branch about throwing jobs onto new members right away. And in fact, one of the members of our Hampton branches I saw her come up. I had to fight really hard to keep the state from trying to pull her in when she was a new member, because I just know how much work it takes to be on a state board, having been there. And so I fought the battle for a good couple of years. She's now going to be on the state board, but she's had a chance to be a branch member and just really enjoy that and embrace it.
I love Kathy's idea about having the president, having folks that are stepping into leadership roles really shadow the folks that are in those current leadership roles. So that 3-year process, I thought that was just a really great example of additional ways to kind of help make sure that folks are ready before they sort of have the crown, put on them.
Well, another thing that we do, we have members, and a lot of the members that we have because of where we are people in the military that are going to retire. And so what they want is they want a way to get into an organization to network. And so a lot of them ask for, how can I volunteer? Because they want to get involved. And so one of the things our VP of membership started was a new membership welcome. And I'm a speaker there and say hi. I think it's important at some point in time, if you really want to do something networking, you've got to get involved and do some kind of volunteering. And then I tell them about what positions are open, or gee, just let us know of things you might be interested in. And then we have a list to track it. But what you find is a lot of them are very excited about joining. And especially if they're looking for, okay, how am I going to get to the next step in my next career? They're very interested in wanting to join. But your point being, you also have to say, now, remember, you have to keep track of your time, and we don't want you to burn out. We don't want you to work a lot of hours. You really have to be careful of your time. Our president says, you need to carve out an hour to do X. And I thought that's a great concept. Okay, I'll put an hour over here to do this, but I'm not going to do it all day, or I'm not going to do it 3 days a week or whatever. So you have to be careful with making sure they don't get burned out.
Our panelists have brought up some tons of good advice. I really like the idea of not rushing volunteers into high responsibility roles, even if they have the competence, but really giving them that orientation time. I love the saying, you can't give what you don't have. So let them absorb and grow a bit before asking them to give. I think that's good stuff. I really also like the idea of having some structures and benchmarks for training. Not just the training and skill building itself, but also signifiers of that show, we know that not all volunteers are motivated by that sort of competitive rising in the ranks, but some are. And it also communicates to new volunteers that they have a place to go. They have a place to grow within your organization. And I think all those things help with retention, in addition to building up your high performers.
Go ahead. I wanted to add, to emphasize something that Tammy said, like in passing, that your volunteers need to get to know more about your organization. They need to understand the impact of your organization. They need to somehow start hearing about the war stories or about people that have come before them, and have that, to build that esprit de corps, right, that you need to foster that kind of engagement. Tammy, I know that you do that, and you sort of mentioned it and kept going, but I think that deserves emphasis.
Thank you. I just feel very strongly about it. Because I volunteered, I worked for Girl Scouts for years. If there's not a love there or an understanding about what the organization is, you're going to lose the volunteer. And I'll just say this, I was never a Girl Scout as a girl. So I was only a Girl Scout as an adult. And my daughter wanted to do Girl Scouts. And I was like, oh my God, I don't camp. I don't do any of this stuff. One of the best things that ever happened to me was the training that was provided for me as a new leader, how to structure my meeting, how to let the girls have a great time. I even camped. I try not to now, but I even camped. And one of the things that one of the classes I took, I'll just use an example, was, so you can't sing. So I went to this class and they taught me all the silly songs that I could sing with my brownies, who are first, second, and third graders. They never knew I couldn't sing because we sang all these silly songs. And one of them heard me say that as an adult, and they were like, Miss Tammy, we sang all the time. I'm like, no, we sang silly songs, so it didn't matter how you sound, but they never had a clue. And so it was that kind of support that helped me to become a successful leader. So when I moved into working for Girl Scouts professionally, that was important to me, that as new leaders came in, that they got the training they needed to support them to do the program. And if someone said, well, I was never a scout, I don't know anything about it, I could tell my story as an example that I wasn't either. And so that was important.
I think there's an element in there too of remembering to make it fun. Yeah. Go ahead, Annalise.
I was just going to say, like, and kind of building off of that, of like, I just think so much about personality types, right? And how, I am, for folks that know me, I'm very extroverted, very talkative, love to chat. And so it's easy sometimes for me to fall into volunteer opportunities because I'm always asking, like, so what are you up to? How can I help? But I also just think that there are so many different personality types from mine that are more helpful. And so thinking about making sure that there are like lots of things that, like, even if you as a person might not think that it's as needed or as valuable, that you're asking folks around you, like, hey, what would be helpful for you in this situation? Especially if maybe you can identify, like, they're more detail oriented than you are, or they maybe are more introverted or something like that. Just to make sure that your volunteer program is really comfortable and accessible and welcoming for all types, and not just kind of like, this is the volunteer program I would want to have as a person. I think to Tammy's point about Girl Scouts, something that's so interesting about that model is that there are so many resources that folks can take advantage of kind of as they need them. And so it's not necessarily like, okay, everybody's at silly song training at 12 p.m., but it's this idea that everybody should have access to what they need to feel comfortable and confident in their role. And so making sure that those resources are available is something that sometimes just takes thinking outside of the box of, here's what everyone needs to kind of meet the bare minimum, thinking about what else can I provide to help kind of make this, even more than the bare minimum, a comfortable space that folks want to be in and identify with.
I think that's a great idea, something I hadn't thought of before, about making some training and resources available for as needed, because then you hit your different kinds of learners, and that may help the high potential or leadership opportunities, make volunteers feel that those are for them, if they have those resources they need. Lots of good chatter in the chat box. I'll just give a quick recap. Kylie mentioned that in her, she takes the information about volunteer skills and interests that she gets from her applications and conveys that into a profile that she can share with staff. Again, just helping identify where those opportunities might match up with the skills that you have. So if you can't connect the dots and what perhaps your colleagues or other members can help connect that as well. Beth also mentioned, Beth Heaton from Mariners Museum mentioned that she attends new member events. Beth, does that mean members of the museum members?
Yes.
Great. Again, like breaking down those silos between stakeholder groups and looking at your stakeholders as potential volunteers, just making those connections. And Beth also mentioned that she creates occasions for their president and CEO to connect with volunteers. And I think that's another thing where you're finding those links among your groups. Let's see. I know you guys can read the chat, but I just wanted to call some of these out. Joy, tell us a little bit about the using your marketing department.
Well, we do a quarterly publication that goes out, and it goes to all donors as well, but many years ago we started including our volunteers on that mailing list as well, because that's where we're promoting all of our new programs, our new buildings that are opening, what services are coming down the pipeline. I try to contribute volunteer stories and highlights to that as well, so that we're also, volunteers are receiving it, learning about everything that's going on in the health system, but then also maybe, seeing something about a fellow volunteer or a volunteer program, and they can say, oh, I'm part of that, So really just partnering with another department and using them to promote us. I routinely send photos and little ideas to our social media manager as well, so that they can post a pet therapy picture on our Facebook page. And I can tell you right now, if you put a dog in a photo, you're guaranteed tenfold the normal amount of responses that you get. So I try to do that stuff regularly, just because otherwise I just don't know if you're not self-promoting, no one really knows all the great things that you're doing and the impact that you're having. So, getting out there and tooting your own horn is, I think, a big part of our job.
Awesome.
Can I say also, Joy, how cool is that? That what if your volunteers who are receiving this newsletter weren't donors? Now they're getting an annual report about what's happening at your hospital and how and they already got buy-in because they're volunteering. Now, all of a sudden they're like, well, I could be a donor too. How smart of your marketing department to do that with you. That's amazing.
Right. And it is effective. And, I try not to use our mailing list as a solicitation list, but we instead include them in what's going on and subtly encourage them, because I feel like they're already donating of their time, and many of them are also donors anyway, but you don't want them to feel like, you're going to bombard them with monetary requests because they're also giving of their time. So I think it's an interesting balance that you need to try to strike there.
Well, that's an interesting equity move too, right? Of thinking about if we can start valuing time and like financial donations as on a more equal playing field, then I think that we can go a lot farther, right, in having those conversations about who's at the table, because all of a sudden our donors aren't just people that are giving financially, but they're also folks that are committing their time and talents, which may be a more inclusive group of people than folks that have lots of money to spare to, name a wing after themselves or something like that.
Well, and I think it also goes in the other direction as well. I try to partner with marketing, but I also try to partner with development. And sometimes I do send them leads of volunteers that through discussions with them, know that they're interested in supporting certain causes. But one of the interesting things is development often comes to me because they have either a donor, a current donor, or they are working with a prospective donor, and the person has indicated an interest in a certain area, and they'll come to me and say, hey, do we have volunteers in that area? Would you reach out to this person and explain what they could do as a volunteer? Because obviously, the more closely connected you are on a personal level with an organization or with a mission, the more likely you are to financially support them. So, again, whether you're connecting in front of other managers or your CEO or your marketing department, it's all those relationships, letting your development staff know that you're here and you're here to help them. And in return, you're helping staff, get a great volunteer.
Well, that's such an interesting thread that volunteerism plays, right, between development, marketing, and then also like client services, right, of thinking about, families that are receiving services from your organization can also be volunteers. And so thinking about how those folks might not all be together in the same room for anything other than a volunteer opportunity or event. And then same for the staff, right, of like, if those staff aren't regularly communicating, but they're all talking to you as the volunteer manager, it just opens up a lot of really cool opportunities.
And speaks also to, what Darcy was saying, that as volunteer administrators, our job is, about connection, but in facilitating, but that means that you need to be in the know of what everything that is going on, right? So that you have to have your, your connections being made in your head. Oh yeah, I have a possibly, like, the wheels need to be turning for you. And that means that you have to build that relationship and be in the know with your organization as well as with your volunteers. We had, just quickly, last year we worked for FEMA, and we organized all the volunteer work there. And there was a time when FEMA wanted to have more, reach out to more diverse communities. And so they realized that what needed to happen was to have spokes clinics and not just everybody come to the one central location. And so what they had 3 spokes clinics in one day, and there were only 2 of us that could, go and direct volunteers. What happened was that we were so involved with all the volunteers that we identified 2 people within our volunteers that we thought would be able to lead the volunteer effort. We knew them, their interest and their time commitment, and we knew, we had developed a relationship with them. And so one of them ended up leading that volunteer event. And so, you yourself need to not just your staff, but you yourself need to think outside the box. That wasn't something that we had considered before, but because of those connections, being in the know of what are the needs and who do you have, this idea came up and it worked out really well.
Thank you. I hope everyone is feeling really proud of the work you do and energized, because it's fun to think about it in this way. I have, I guess, kind of a final question for our panelists. I know that in preparing for today, you were thinking about the work that you do with volunteers and leadership and high responsibility roles. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you haven't talked about today that you'd like to add.
I'll just make a couple of shameless plugs if that's okay, Darcy.
Please do.
Great. I would highly recommend, if this is a conversation you're interested in, please join us at the 2022 Virginia Volunteerism Summit. I'll also say that, so AmeriCorps is a great way to help engage folks as high potential volunteers at your organization. AmeriCorps State is a program that engages folks in direct service. So it's oftentimes tasks that we would think about for volunteers. And so I would love to kind of talk with your organization about what AmeriCorps can look like. But essentially, it's a program that helps provide the support, so a living stipend and an educational award for high potential volunteers that are serving your organization over a term of service, which can range from 100 hours all the way up to 1,700 hours, which goes to about 40 hours a week within, every week for a year. So really excited for the different ways that AmeriCorps can kind of help support the work that you're already doing. And I know Mark's going to share my email, so I'd be happy to chat with you further about what it could look like for you, for your organization, and how it can complement and strengthen your volunteer program.
I just wanted to share real quick. Sometimes you do all the right things and you train all the volunteers in the right things, and they have all the right certifications and they've gone through the whole scenario, right? And it's still something the bottom falls out for some of them. And, in the fire department, one of my teammates that went through the training that I went through, he had to mask up like we did. He had to put cover his mask and go through a pipe where we hardly fit. We had to, a long pipe, just testing for things that might trigger your fear and all of those things. Well, he passed all those things, and he was good with a lot of the tasks. The first fire that we went to, he was my partner, and we went in. It was an active fire, but we went in as newbies to a section that wasn't completely like on fire and smoke and all the things. We were just looking around, assessing, right? And he panicked and left me. So after that, he was assigned to pumper duty, right? But so he had gone through the whole training, and sometimes it fails, right? So do not beat yourself up. It's not, your program is not failing them. You just cannot sometimes anticipate all the things that can happen in real life.
Gosh, I would love to have a follow-up conversation about data and outcomes for volunteer programs. I'll save that rant for another day.
Data and outcomes for volunteer programs. Yes, we're filing, Mark and I are filing that away as well.
I wanted to say, I know that Beth also had in the chat about her docent and volunteers meeting with their president and CEO monthly. That is just incredible to me that the president is showing how much he values their opinion and the opportunity to speak with them. He's taking time. So that is a huge success. And I think that's, thank you so much for sharing that, Beth.
I was just going to add to Olga. I think that's a great point. Sometimes it fails in terms of the volunteers' performance, but I think also one thing that we've seen in the last few years is an explosion of family advisory councils, which is fantastic. And they're with all of these different service lines where maybe a patient has a specific diagnosis, and it connects then families who are here in our facility for that service line with each other. So sometimes we find out that we failed. And I think you have to be open as an organization if you're going to bring people in to volunteer like that, to really be open to that feedback and that criticism of, we went through your program, this is what we didn't like, or this is what, we were disappointed in. And the good news out of that is all of those advisory councils, we are open to their feedback. We've implemented a lot of their ideas. And it's not just the parents who participate. We have a separate advisory council that is made up of patients, so kids as advisory council members and siblings of patients. And it talks about their experience. They come together virtually now, but in the past in-person meetings, and talk about their personal experiences of being a patient in the hospital. Every year they come up with at least one big wish list item of, we wish we had this when we were there. We wish this was different. And we have implemented so many of those changes. And then we really try to amplify that it came from them and give them the credit for making those changes. Many of them are no longer patients. And the amazing part is, they come up with programs or changes they would like to see that doesn't even affect them. It's for the patients that will be coming after them. So I think, it can fail, and you can feel sometimes as an organization like you failed, but there's always growth in what's uncomfortable. And certainly that's what we found to be the case.
Wow, that is a powerful point. And I think, combining that with Tammy's comment and Beth's example is it's about creating a culture of volunteerism, a culture where volunteers are valued in responsible and leadership type of roles. And part of that is part of that culture has to do with listening and accountability, and that's profound to me. It's making me stop and think a little bit. So I appreciate that.
I'm not sure if we mentioned this specifically too, but I think your staff also needs to have some training about how to interact with your volunteers, right? These are They're not paid, yes, but you are relying on them for a lot of things. And so they deserve that respect, and, you know, they deserve a level of treatment that makes them feel that they are part of the organization and not just like here for 3 hours, however it is, to foster that culture of volunteerism within your organization. Your staff needs to not just be on board about like, yeah, I'll use a volunteer, but also on board about how to steward that relation, to cultivate that relationship with the volunteer, and to be listening and to be open to their needs and what else they can bring to the organization as well.
Thank you. I am wondering, are there any final thoughts from our audience or our panel?
I wonder if we can hear from people who have high value volunteers that we haven't heard of. You know, just tell us what they do for your organization, what roles they fulfill for you or projects.
Hey, I'm happy to share. My name is Megan Gillespie. I have been sort of going back and forth because I don't know if this necessarily meets, you know, what you all consider as the definition of high value volunteers. I work for Edmark. We are a pediatric hospice and palliative care organization in Hampton Roads, and we utilize volunteers in a lot of different capacities. And one of the major ones is with the events that we host for our families throughout the year. So I have 2 or 3 volunteers who on a regular basis are in the office helping me organize, sort through donations, and get ready for a lot of our big family events that we do. One of our volunteers is in the office almost 40 hours a week from the beginning of November through the end of December, because we provide food boxes, food baskets with all of the, you know, ingredients that a family would need to make Thanksgiving dinner or a holiday dinner. So she sort of manages the donations that come in, organizing them, sorting them, getting them reorganized into manageable boxes, and then we sort of work together. I sort of, you know, am on the back end of things, making sure that all of our patient lists are up to date and we've gotten all the information from the families that we need, and that we have their current addresses where they want everything delivered, because we have volunteers who deliver all of those food baskets and then gifts as well. But I would not be able to do I could not do everything that is required of what we provide for families without Sharon. And I am really hoping Sharon is in her mid-70s and she is wonderful, but I know that I'm not going to be able to rely on her forever. And so I am sort of in the process of trying to identify other volunteers who can start working with her, but who we can rely on to the degree that we rely on Sharon, because truly we wouldn't be able to put on what we do for our families without her. So it's a little, it's a little stressful because I rely on her a lot. I mean, just now, we also provide Easter baskets for all of our families and all of the kids in their families. And she is currently in North Carolina with her great aunt, and she's making, she's doing data entry on the spreadsheet that we have to manage all of the food allergies, dietary restrictions, specific interests, because we have volunteers, we have donors who donate Easter baskets, and then we will have volunteers, and Sharon will head this up come the first week of April, they sort of deconstruct all of those Easter baskets and rebuild them specific to each child's interests and medical needs, dietary needs, all of that related to their specific needs. So it's wonderful. I love Sharon. She's amazing. But I know that if she is not in the office, then I would not be able to do everything that we're able to do. So.
Thanks, Megan. I see Kylie has a raised hand. Was that?
I've been asked last year because we're fundraising, to supply volunteers for our gala events, which was never done for 30 years. It was always paid models that they had at their gala events. So then they've said, okay, we want volunteers to do it, but like, we sort of have to train you, Kylie, and just make sure that you're not going to be bringing in the riffraff, because these are like big as balls, you know. So I found that sometimes with high potential volunteers, sometimes the staff will want them, but then they think that they're just volunteers. They've got to get rid of that word "just." So it's been a lot of my training wasn't with the volunteers, it was with the staff. And I've now got a junior staff member working with me. And for instance, last week we had a meeting about a big gala event that's happening in the most exclusive house in Sydney in the grounds next Saturday night. And they want everyone to have RAT tests beforehand. So all the staff are being given their RAT tests to do, and all the guests. But the volunteers, they said, can you take the volunteers around the corner and just do it in a park somewhere? And my junior staff member went to that meeting because I couldn't go. And she said, that's what we've got to. And I said, no, if we're not doing, these are volunteers. I said, you have to be their voice. This is the biggest part of your job, is you're their advocate. They are not just a volunteer. If you would not treat a staff member like that, you're not treating a volunteer like that. Like our gala ball that we had them at last, the Hemsworths were at it. They were the table host for Chris and Liam Hemsworth. And volunteers collected $2 million in an hour on iPads. Like, you're expecting the most amazing volunteers, and I'm doing a special training with them and Zooms, and they have to do all these things online. And they're awesome. They're better than the models. They're saying to me, we have these models we're paying a fortune for, and they were turning up, hadn't read the briefs, hadn't done anything. So I said, so now, you know what, event managers, back off. And I've actually had to say that. I'm giving you, you've just said it, I'm giving you better than you've ever had in 30 years. So you need to respect them better than you ever did for 30 years for those models. And I think that is a big part, and it's really fun. Like, it's really great. I'm learning this with this junior staff member now, saying that the biggest part of our job is we're the advocate for our volunteers. If they want a high potential volunteer, then they have to be treated not as saints either. That's another thing. There's like treating them as just a volunteer or treating them as a saint. They need to be treated the same as any other staff member. I think that is our biggest role, and that's my biggest passion, is that, yeah, I will demand it.
That's great. For me, that comes back to that culture of volunteerism. And I think, Megan brings up a good point. We, the definition of a high responsibility volunteer role or a volunteer in leadership, that's what you make of it. I mean, all of our volunteers are essential. They all expand our capacity. And I think it's just looking at ways where we can make pathways for them to expand that capacity even more, make that space for them within our organizations to give at the most that they can give, and connect with where we need them most. So,
can I add
Tammy?
a note? Yes,
Yeah.
I saw that some of the notes in the chat to Megan about replacing your volunteer with a team. I think it's really important. Sometimes when you have a high working or power volunteer, they make the job so easy for you because they go above and beyond. the problem is when other volunteers see them, they think they have to do all of that as well. And I think that's the reason why you have to break it into bits and pieces to replace her, is because the job has become so big. Other people are like, I can't do all that. I just can't. She just does, too much. So I think when in considering that, breaking it into pieces may be the way you have to replace her, because that's what happens. You get somebody that does a job, and then when they leave, you got to have 6 people to do that one job.
Tammy, I'm the same way with her. I just started in this position last June, and I had to rely on, really, truly, it came to the holidays and she was like, how do you want? And I was like, Sharon, I don't know. You tell me. You've been doing this, not me. So it's been, but yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think you're absolutely right. So it's a matter of just like, really truly breaking down everything that she does. And then, and I think that goes back to a lot of the conversation earlier about really identifying like, okay, what is it that she does and how can I sort of break that down into different categories and then identify specific, volunteers based on those specific categories, which
and you may get a volunteer that wants to work the holidays, like the Thanksgiving, Christmas, and you may have a different set that want to work Easter.
Yep.
But
yeah, I think this conversation's been really helpful.
I think Sharon can also move into a supervisory role, right? Like she could have hands.
Yeah.
Right. And make sure that they're doing certain jobs while she knows, how all the pieces fit together, it may relieve her of some of the burden as well. Right.
I tried to do that a little bit at the holidays because she's starting to have some physical, stuff going on, back issues and stuff. She has no interest in that. She's like, I don't want to be telling people what to do. I just want to do it. So I'm going to have to get creative, but this conversation has been helpful to sort of think through that.
Has anybody looked at getting a manual or something, or some way of capturing what these people do, so you have a feel for what they're going to do? We're doing that now in our PMI chapter. One of the things I'm doing is using Microsoft Planner, and I have lists of, how do you set up a position? How do you interview somebody? So I have a little cut and paste for my Zoom calls in it. And then the onboarding, I have a list of, okay, when somebody comes in, depending on their role, they may get an email, they may get business cards, whatever, who gets what. And then we also have one for what I call retirement. So you have like a volunteer life cycle thing. Here's the position, here's the person coming in, getting them in, and then make sure you thank them on the way out for, what they've done.
Thanks.
I don't know if you all picked up on this, but PMI is a good resource. Keep it in mind. They want to volunteer, they need the hours, and project management applies to everything. So, just offering your services, Kathy.
Thank you very much. I think you can go on the PMI site, or I think my email is going to be in the chat. But yeah, we project management. A lot of people do project management, maybe not official, but a lot of people do project management. And PMI is now looking at not only the consulting technical, what you think of as a project manager, but looking at entrepreneurs, because they need project management for setting up a company, or people that are retired that just want to do something outside of enjoy their retirement. I'm like that. I would always want to be doing something. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I have to say I am humbled and grateful to have been brought in proximity with all of this great knowledge and experience, both amongst our panel and our audience as well. I encourage you to keep the conversations going with your colleagues. Mark has just entered our contact info in the chat box, and you'll get that in the resource list later this week as well. And consider some of the groups that are here today if you're not already a member. And I'm going to turn it over to Mark for some final words.
All right. Well, first off, thanks, Darcy. You moderated a wonderful panel. Thanks, panel, for being so wonderful. For Marcy, thank you all for joining. And just one of the things I do with these events is I always look to see how many people stuck to the end. So this is a really high percentage. This is awesome. So that speaks well to the content. The proof is in the pudding. In addition to the information on the panel, which, interestingly enough, none of it's clickable, but you'll see that stuff on an email you'll get Friday. You'll have all these links and the event that Annalise mentioned, et cetera, et cetera. But I just dropped into the chat box your immediate homework assignment. So I would love everybody to take the survey. You don't have to take it now. You do have to click on the link. Just go ahead, open it up, deal with it later, and then we can share how much you loved everything. I would like to invite everybody to consider 1 month from now on April 13th. It will be shifting the evening next quarter. If you're interested in communications, or somebody in your organization is, drop in. We had another free event. It's more of a roundtable where we talk amongst ourselves. There's a link to click on it. It is indeed free. And our full calendar of events is that last link in the last chat there, events.pdchr.org. So like I said, Friday, look for a little follow-up information. Whoever street outreach is, I don't know who you are. So you still need to text me and tell me, or drop in the chat box or whatever. Tell me who you are so I can make sure that you get checked off on the Eventbrite gods. But other than that, again, thank you all for attending. We did schedule this to go to 1:30. The time is now 1:27, so I'm going to grant you all the gift of time. How can you go wrong with 3 minutes? Use them wisely, use them well, use them for yourself. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mark.